I am Tex Harris, a Foreign Service officer for 35 years, and I want to tell the story about how I, and a lot of help from Lady Luck, stopped the killing in the dirty war in Argentina. In 1974, Juan Perón, who was president of Argentina, died. The country then was run by his wife, not Evita, but Isabelita, his second wife, who was a former dancer, and she was assisted by an astrologer. And the country went from hell in a handbasket. The military and the country were faced with two terrorist insurgent groups, a rural one and an urban one, the Montoneros. And in March of 1976, the military staged a coup and put Isabel and her advisors on a plane into exile and took the country over. They had a plan to eliminate the terrorist threat that was surging in Argentina based on a model that the French had used in Algeria, which was to clandestinely kidnap suspected terrorists, torture them, and quickly get information about other people in their cells, and then go out and capture them and keep repeating that process until they had wrapped up an entire cell. That, over a period of a few years, resulted in the killing of over 15,000 Argentine citizens, maybe 30,000. It was terrible, because when the Argentine military ran out of terrorists, they then decided to go after left-wing intellectual supporters of terrorism. These were people who had no guns, no grenades, no bombs, but would sit in cafes and drink coffee and red wine and discuss how bad the government was and the need for revolution and reform in Argentina. I was sent to Argentina as a new breed of Foreign Service officer in the administration of Jimmy Carter. I was a human rights officer. I was sent there to report on the treatment of Argentine citizens by their government, and in this case, it was brutal. United States relations with Argentina during the Carter administration were at a very, very low ebb. We were cutting back on all kinds of programs and cooperation with the Argentine, particularly the Argentine military, who were conducting these clandestine kidnap, torture, and murder programs throughout the country. There was one project that was proposed, which was a foreign export-import bank loan of $270 million to a company called Astilleros Argentina, Argentine Shipyards, which was to be the biggest bilateral connection that the United States had had with Argentina in many years. And it was to guarantee a company called Allis-Chalmers, which was one of three companies in the world who built humongous generators and electrical equipment for huge river dam projects. The Argentines and the Paraguayans had one of the world's largest dams under construction, and Astilleros Argentina, with the help from Allis-Chalmers, was going to build a factory in Buenos Aires to produce the generators and the associated equipment to turn flowing river water into electricity in massive amounts for Argentina. And I, just out of a whim, one day did not have a luncheon on, and I decided to stop by the economic office, and I asked the secretary who was in the office if I could borrow the Aseritov file. And she said, fine, and she gave it to me, and she saw that I had a sandwich and a Coke in my hand, and she warned me to be careful not to spill anything on the file. When I was going through the file, I saw a memorandum to the files, which is a memorandum which does not go to Washington. It's just an internal memo, which stated that Astilleros Argentina was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Argentine Navy, which was one of the major perpetrators of the torture and human rights abuse in Argentina, and clearly a company that would in no way ever qualify for a United States government loan. I had an agreement. I'd had some difficulties with the ambassador in getting my reporting out, and I had an agreement which had been brokered by the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. It's pretty incredible when you have the Undersecretary of State putting together an agreement between yourself as a middle grade officer and your ambassador, that I could send anything I wanted to Washington that the embassy would not send in its formal channels in a letter. And so I wrote a letter to the Latin American Bureau and to the Human Rights Bureau and gave a copy to the ambassador and put them in the pouch, telling them that the Astilleros Argentina was the Navy Brass's retirement fund. This was the company that was going to make all the Navy admirals multimillionaires in their retirement. Well, when the letter went to the ambassador's office, the DCM read it, and he ordered that the other two letters, which were in the classified pouch going to Washington on a Friday, and this was a Friday afternoon, were to be withdrawn. And about 4:45, my boss, the political counselor, came to see me, and he put the letters on my desk and asked me to reconsider sending those letters in, that wiser and more experienced hands in the embassy had decided not to inform Washington about the ownership of the Argentine Shipyards Company, and that I should think about it for another week. Well, I was furious because that was not the rules of engagement that I had agreed to with the ambassador. And so I went down to the pouch room, and the pouch had been closed, the seals had been put on it. And one of the toughest negotiations I had was with the communications officer getting the pouch opened. But they did open it up, and they put the letters in the pouch. The letters got to Washington, and immediately the XM loan was canceled. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce went wild. There were hearings held in both the House and the Senate Commerce and Banking Committees over the impact of the Carter human rights policy on American trade and investments overseas. And this became kind of a political hot potato in Washington. But the deal was done. Now, at this time, the Argentine Army and the Argentine Air Force were trying to convince the Argentine Navy to stop the killing process that had been underway and to invite the Inter-American Human Rights Commission to visit Argentina to show them that the killing had stopped. This was a way of reestablishing Argentina's bona fides with the international community so it could get loans and avoid further sanctions that were impacting on the Argentine community. But the Navy refused because the Navy wanted to get these, what they called perejil, the little parsley, involved in the thinking of bad thoughts, not the doing of bad terrorist deeds, and felt that the work of the operation was still needed. But once the Navy lost the contract support, Videla, the head of the Argentine Army, went to the Navy and said, if I can convince the Americans to provide to you the loan guarantee and allow the plant to be built, will you agree to end the killings? And they said yes, they could be bought. So in the end, it was greed. It was not the Navy let its greed for a soft retirement for its Navy brass to overcome their qualms about continuing the process of ridding Argentina of what they called the surrounding tissue. They saw terrorism as being a cancer, and that they had not only to eliminate the cancer, which were the terrorists, but also the supporting tissue around it, which was the intellectuals and the supporters of left-wing ideology in the country. The Pope dies. A new Pope is elected, and this is the luck part. The new Pope is elected, and this is Pope John I, and he dies after 33 days. And a new Pope, Pope John Paul II, is chosen, and at that time Videla sends a message to the White House asking to meet with Vice President Mondale in Rome, and that meeting took place. And at that meeting, Mondale agrees that in exchange for the Argentine militaries, all the services, ending the killing in Argentina, he will recommend and provide the loan guarantee allowing the construction of the company to be built, building the turbines to enrich the Navy brass. That, in short, was a story of serendipity and good luck, but it ended the killings in Argentina. I paid a price. I was identified as being a non-team player and identified for selection out from the Foreign Service, which means firing. The Human Rights Bureau sent a very strong reclama to that recommendation, and I was kept on board, but I could not get promoted. But 10 years later, the Department of State reconsidered the matter, and they gave me their highest award, the Meritorious Honor Award, to mark my contributions in human rights in Argentina. The Foreign Service is a great career, it's a great challenge, and it's a wonderful way to contribute to your country. My tale shows how luck, in addition to initiative, are needed to achieve diplomatic success. The invitation to the Inter-American Human Rights Commission to visit Argentina was a key policy objective of the United States government for a number of years after the military coup to end the human rights abuses in Argentina. And through a series of strange and wonderful events, the identification and cutting off of the funding of the retirement of the Argentine Navy got the hardest line Argentine military group to come aboard and to stop the killing and to invite the Inter-American Human Rights Commission to Argentina and to begin a new period in Argentine history. My name is Tex Harris. I was a Foreign Service officer for 35 years, and I want to tell a story about the risks involved in being a diplomat. I was the human rights officer in Buenos Aires, Argentina during the Dirty War, And my job was to report on the dirty war. And this, of course, was known to the Argentine intelligence military services because they saw me and knew of all my contacts with the Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo and all the other human rights groups in the country. And they followed me continually, and I was under easy observation. I was 6'7" at the time and drove a great big Chevrolet station wagon. There were only 2 of them in the country, and I was pretty easy to spot. Often, my security, personal security, would be increased. And that was because the Argentine Navy, for example, would come in and report to the embassy security officials that the Argentine Army was going to kill Harris. They were fed up, they've had enough, they're going to get him. And then 2 months later, the Argentine Army would come in and said, the Navy has had it, Harris is toast, get him out of the country. And so these threats went on continually. One night I was invited to a party by a former politician, and his house was about, 30, 40 minutes in the country outside of the city limits of Buenos Aires. And my wife and I went there, and Argentine parties start at 9 o'clock and they end well after midnight. My wife got tired, and around 11 o'clock, one of our neighbors was leaving, and she said, can we go, or shall I just take off with the neighbors? I said, I have several people here I need to talk to, and so I'll come home alone. So my wife rode home with the neighbors, so about 1 o'clock in the morning, I get in my car and I head home back into Buenos Aires, and I'm on a kind of a country road. And all of a sudden, I look in the rearview mirror, and there's a car behind me, and there's nothing unusual. And I then come up in the middle of no place. There's a red light, and there's a car stopped at the red light, and I pull up behind it, and the car behind me pulls up right on my bumper, and I look in my mirror, and all of a sudden, all the 8 doors on the 2 cars pop open, and 8 guys with pistols or shotguns or rifles jump out of the cars, and I am totally surrounded with 8 weapons pointing at me. And I said, I am dead. I said, this is it. And somehow, in a television program, I had seen some storyline that showed that if your hands are above your head, when the bullets come in, the forensic medicine people will be able to determine the position of your arms. And of course, the most significant way they're going to shoot people is by claiming that they were going for some weapon or something like that under their seat. And so I said, I must keep my hands above my head at all times, that if I drop them, I will be shot. That was foremost in my mind. So I reached into my pocket and I got my diplomatic cedula. The car was locked, but I lowered the window about a half an inch, and some guy in a suit came up and started yelling at me in Spanish. And I just said, Cuerpo Diplomático, and I put my card up to the window, and he took it and examined it, gave it back to me, and just screamed at me. And I kept my hands above my head all the time, waiting for the bullet to come in, or the shooting, or the glass to be broken. They asked me to open the doors. I refused on the basis this was a diplomatic car. And at the end, the guy said, you ran a red light, which was not true, and they drove away. The obvious purpose was to shake me up. They shook me up. But anyway, that was a story that ended well. We had 3 or 4 other incidents that took place where there were kind of attempts to feign a kidnapping of me in front of my house. And on a couple of times, we went out of our house and there were guys there with machine guns and Uzis, small machine guns, in the door, claiming that they were there looking for some terrorists. So there are some thrills and chills in diplomatic service, but there are also wonderful rewards of doing very interesting things and serving your nation.